There are moments in history when silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. When a nation doesn't shout its victories, it builds them quietly, brick by brick. Canada. The world rarely sees it coming, but make no mistake, it's not just playing the game, it's changing it, and now it's winning. In a world often dominated by loud voices, dramatic standoffs, and media spectacles, Canada's approach stands in stark contrast. It doesn't push its way to the front of the global stage. It doesn't dominate headlines with threats, ultimatums, or bluster. Instead, Canada has mastered the art of quiet diplomacy, an intentional and understated strategy that is slowly, deliberately reshaping global alliances in ways that louder nations often fail to notice until the results are undeniable. Canada understands the value of presence without provocation. Its diplomats rarely speak in absolutes. They listen, they observe, and they move with subtle precision. Whether it's climate talks, trade negotiations, or peacekeeping missions, Canada's role is rarely center stage, but its influence is deeply felt behind closed doors. Its ability to build trust patiently, authentically, makes it a reliable partner to nations both large and small. In an era where many alliances feel transactional, Canada offers something different: consistency, empathy, and quiet strength. This has proven to be a powerful tool in a fractured geopolitical landscape. As tensions rise between traditional superpowers and old alliances strain under the weight of conflicting interests, Canada has quietly positioned itself as a bridge. It doesn't take sides impulsively. Instead, it fosters conversations that others won't. It opens back channels that de-escalate tension, and it earns respect not by force, but by fidelity to principle and clarity of purpose. Look at its relationship with the European Union. While others have walked away from trade agreements or sparked tariff wars, Canada has done the opposite. Through frameworks like CETA, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, it has deepened ties with Europe, encouraging free movement of goods, services, and ideas. Not only has this benefited its own economy, but it has also positioned Canada as a transatlantic partner that Europe can trust, especially in times of uncertainty. In the Indo-Pacific, Canada's engagement has been less about posturing and more about participation. Rather than racing to build military presence or economic dominance, it has leaned into collaboration. It has pursued multilateral partnerships with ASEAN nations focused on sustainable development, gender equity, and educational exchange. It's not trying to win the region, it's trying to uplift it. That subtle shift in posture has made it welcome in rooms where louder voices are viewed with suspicion. Then there is Canada's role in humanitarian diplomacy, whether it's supporting refugee resettlement, contributing to global health initiatives, or leading with a strong voice on indigenous rights in international forums. Canada has earned moral credibility. This kind of influence doesn't show up in military budgets or GDP charts, but it shows up in votes at the UN, in coalitions formed around human rights, and in the quiet admiration of leaders who are looking for allies that reflect their values. It's also worth noting how Canada manages its relationships with larger powers. With the United States, it plays the role of a steady neighbor, close enough to be aligned, independent enough to say no. When U.S. politics swing wildly from one administration to the next, Canada remains grounded. That stability has created a kind of ballast in North American affairs. With China, Canada walks a fine line, holding firm on human rights while maintaining diplomatic channels. It's not easy, but it's deliberate, and it's working in ways that brute force diplomacy often doesn't. Even when tensions flare, as they have in recent years, Canada's approach isn't reactive. It's reflective. When its citizens are detained abroad, when its exports are blocked, when its values are challenged, it doesn't fold, and it doesn't escalate needlessly. It works the channels, it builds coalitions, it applies pressure precisely without spectacle, and over time it gets results. That's the mark of mature diplomacy: quiet, principled, persistent. In the shadow of louder nations, Canada's method might seem modest, but it is anything but weak. Its soft power has grown, its alliances have deepened, its reputation has solidified. And as the world begins to look for leadership that is calm, steady, and solutions-focused, Canada finds itself in an unfamiliar but earned position, not just a participant in the game, but a shaper of its rules. Not because it demanded it, but because it proved it deserved it. In an age defined by rapid technological shifts, climate urgency, and economic volatility, nations are being judged not by how loudly they promise change, but by how effectively they prepare for it. Canada has not only understood this truth, it has acted on it. While others debated short-term fixes and partisan gains, Canada made a conscious decision to invest in long-term resilience. Strategic investments in sustainability and innovation have quietly transformed its economic landscape, and now those choices are beginning to pay dividends. So for that, as people watched the unprecedented birth of AI, Canada didn't wait for global consensus to act on climate change. It took the initiative, embedding sustainability into the heart of its national agenda. From federal policy to provincial programs, the country has prioritized clean energy, green infrastructure, and low-carbon industries. These weren't symbolic gestures. Billions were poured into wind, solar, hydro, and clean tech innovation. As a result, Canada is no longer just a resource-rich nation. It's becoming a renewable energy powerhouse. Provinces like Quebec and British Columbia now generate the vast majority of their power from clean sources, proving that economic growth and environmental responsibility are not mutually exclusive. This shift towards sustainability was matched by a parallel drive in technological innovation. Canada recognized early on that the future belongs to those who build it, so it built ecosystems to support next-generation industries. Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver have become global hubs for artificial intelligence, biotech, and quantum computing. Government funding, research grants, and startup-friendly policies laid the foundation, while top universities and immigrant talent filled the pipeline. The result? A tech sector that isn't just thriving, it's exporting ideas, talent, and solutions to the world. And it doesn't stop at energy and tech. Canada's agricultural sector is turning toward regenerative practices, using AI and big data to grow more with less. Its automotive industry is transitioning into electric vehicle production, powered by investments in battery manufacturing and mineral processing. Even its building codes and city planning now center around sustainability, creating spaces that are cleaner, smarter, and more livable. These investments weren't always popular. They required patience. They required vision. But now, as global markets scramble to decarbonize and automate, Canada finds itself not behind the curve, but ahead of it. Companies are relocating, not because of low taxes or cheap labor, but because Canada offers what few others can: stability, innovation, and a clear path to a greener future. Multinational firms are investing in Canadian clean hydrogen. Tech giants are opening AI labs. Electric vehicle manufacturers are choosing Canadian soil for their new plants. What once seemed like cautious moves are now being recognized as strategic masterstrokes. And there's also a deeper wisdom in how Canada has linked innovation with inclusion. It hasn't treated sustainability as a luxury for the rich or tech as a toy for the elite. Programs have focused on rural broadband expansion, upskilling indigenous communities, and retraining workers from fading industries. The energy transition isn't just about solar panels. It's about social cohesion. It's about giving every Canadian a stake in the future economy. And that, more than anything, is what makes the model work. This fusion of sustainability and innovation has also boosted Canada's standing on the global stage. It is no longer just a peaceful player, it is a practical example. When international bodies debate green finance, Canada isn't merely present, it's offering data, case studies, and scalable solutions. When countries seek guidance on integrating new technology into public services, Canada's digital governance model becomes a reference point. In short, Canada's strategic investments have made it not just relevant, but respected. Of course, challenges remain. No transition is without turbulence. But because Canada laid the groundwork early, it now faces those challenges with tools in hand and momentum on its side. It bet on the long game. It chose the hard path when the easy one seemed tempting. And now the payoff is no longer promise. It's a reality unfolding in every sector, every province, and every global partnership that looks to Canada and sees not just a country, but a blueprint for what's possible. In a world rocked by inflation spikes, trade wars, and market crashes, most economies have responded with urgency, panic, or political theater. But Canada took a different route. It didn't try to outshout the storm. It didn't swing wildly from one extreme to another. Instead, it embraced a calm, measured economic vision, one built on long-term planning, steady leadership, and policy choices grounded in realism rather than reaction. That calm, that deliberate patience has not only weathered volatility, it has transformed it into a series of quiet but significant opportunities. Canada's approach wasn't about making headlines with sweeping reforms or ideological gambles. It was about reinforcing the fundamentals: responsible monetary policy, transparent regulation, prudent public spending. At a time when markets were bracing for chaos, Canada chose clarity. When global economies were pumping artificial stimuli into overheated sectors, Canada tightened where needed, but kept investing in the future. This consistency created a unique kind of confidence, not just among domestic consumers, but within international investors seeking stable ground in an unpredictable world. The Bank of Canada played a pivotal role, navigating interest rate policy with precision, signaling its intentions without surprises, and balancing inflation control with economic support. At the same time, federal and provincial governments collaborated more than they clashed, funneling resources into sectors that wouldn't just survive turbulence, but grow through it: healthcare, green energy, infrastructure, and innovation. And that calm vision meant that when shocks came, Canada didn't crumble, it absorbed, it adapted. One of the key differences was how Canada viewed risk. Where others saw danger, Canada saw redesign. The housing sector, for example, was addressed not just with patches, but with reforms aimed at long-term affordability and urban resilience. Immigration policies were tuned not just for numbers, but for skill gaps and future demographic shifts. While some nations shut doors and tightened borders during economic uncertainty, Canada opened pathways, welcoming talent, families, and entrepreneurs who have since helped expand the country's tax base and workforce. This foresight turned volatility into a talent advantage. Canada became a magnet for global workers disillusioned by chaos elsewhere. from Silicon Valley tech professionals to Eastern European engineers and South Asian students that came not just for jobs, but for the promise of security. That flow of human capital, carefully managed and socially integrated, became one of Canada's most valuable economic assets. And it happened because the country's vision didn't chase short-term approval. It built long-term capacity. Trade strategy followed the same pattern. Canada didn't retreat into protectionism when global supply chains fractured. It diversified. It forged new trade partnerships across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. It deepened relationships with Europe through CETA and kept its commitments within USMCA while negotiating from a position of principle rather than panic. The result? Export resilience. Even as global trade grew uncertain, Canadian businesses found new markets, new partners, and new supply lines. Small businesses and startups weren't left out of this vision either. Strategic funding programs, incubator networks, and access to clean tech incentives helped local companies grow, even as larger global firms pulled back. In rural and urban areas alike, entrepreneurs found support, not just in dollars, but in dependable frameworks. That kind of business environment doesn't make headlines, but it builds an economy that holds its ground when the winds pick up. Perhaps most impressive has been how this calm vision extended into fiscal strategy. Canada kept its debt to GDP ratio among the lowest in the G7, allowing it to absorb shocks without spiraling. It maintained transparency around public spending, giving citizens a sense of trust, rare in modern democracies where distrust often triggers economic anxiety. And when recovery programs were rolled out, they were targeted, not reckless, trying to sustain, not distort. The payoff? Global credit agencies upgrade outlooks. Foreign direct investment sees Canada not as a fallback, but as a priority. Economic mobility improves at home. And perhaps most crucially, people feel that sense of forward motion, not because they're being sold hope, but because they can see it, touch it, live it. That's what a calm economic vision does. It doesn't chase the fire. It builds the foundation. It accepts uncertainty as a given and turns volatility into a map, one that others are now beginning to follow, not by force, not by fear, but by a steady belief that stability itself is a kind of power, a power that when wielded wisely unlocks opportunity hidden inside every crisis. In an era where political theater often overshadows substance and global power is too often equated with noise, disruption, and military posture, Canada is presenting an alternative model, one rooted not in dominance, but in stability. Leadership for Canada is not about asserting authority through force or fear. It's about showing what's possible when a country holds firm to its values, plans with patience, and leads with consistency. This quiet steadiness is not just setting an example, it's redefining what global power looks like in the 21st century. Stability in Canada's case isn't stagnation, it's strategic. It's the kind of balance that allows a country to absorb external shocks without veering off course. While other nations swing wildly with every election cycle, Canada maintains a largely centrist path, one that prioritizes consensus building over confrontation. Its institutions are trusted. Its civil discourse, though imperfect, is still functional. And its leadership, regardless of party, tends to protect the integrity of systems that so many others are dismantling for short-term gain. That consistency sends a message to the world. Canada is a safe partner, a reliable negotiator, and a leader that can be counted on, not just in good times, but especially when things fall apart. This brand of leadership is rare in today's world. It doesn't demand attention, but it earns influence. When global crises emerge, Canada is often among the first to respond, not with self-congratulation, but with action. Whether it's climate summits, humanitarian aid, or pandemic coordination, Canada's voice is calm, reasoned, and respected. It brings people to the table, it finds common ground, and in doing so, it exercises a form of power that is harder to define, but increasingly vital, the power to unify. Look at how the world is responding to instability. War in Eastern Europe, trade disruptions in Asia, populist waves in the West. In this fractured environment, nations are looking for anchors. Not more noise, not more chaos, but leaders who bring clarity, leaders who bring solutions. And that's where Canada's stability becomes more than a domestic strength. It becomes a global asset. Foreign ministries around the world now view Ottawa not as an afterthought, but as a strategic ally. Canada's involvement in NATO is not measured by how loudly it speaks, but by how consistently it delivers. Its peacekeeping missions, its support for multilateral diplomacy, and its investments in global development all reflect a leadership style that values longevity over legacy. It's not trying to win every moment, it's trying to shape the long arc of global progress. At home, this leadership through stability has allowed Canada to implement long-term policy frameworks that endure. National health care is protected, education systems are continually refined, environmental goals aren't scrapped with each new government, they're carried forward, improved, and adapted. The result is a society that, while not immune to division, still operates from a shared sense of direction. And that internal coherence makes it easier for Canada to project confidence and competence abroad. This model has particular appeal to emerging economies and mid-sized powers, many of which are navigating their own democratic challenges and looking for guidance that doesn't come with strings attached. Canada's approach, partnership without pressure, assistance without interference, is deeply appreciated. It's why Canadian diplomats are often trusted mediators, why Canadian institutions are sought for advice, and why Canadian leadership on global issues feels less like imposition and more like invitation. In redefining power, Canada is also redefining influence. It doesn't need to dominate the headline. It influences through policy frameworks, educational exchange, and cultural diplomacy. It elevates ideas instead of egos, and it competes not by tearing others down, but by lifting the standards of what responsible governance can look like.